PBS, Proxmox Backup Server, the myth, the legend, the bespoke small batch artisanal backup solution for Proxmox Virtual Environment. You know, this video has been on my radar for a long time now, and now it's time to actually get into it. Let's do this. Hey there, HomeLabers, self-hosters, IT pros, and engineers. Rich here. A while back, I created a video on Veeam backup and recovery specifically for Proxmox when Veeam officially released its support. It has always been my plan to do a video on PBS and then compare them to each other. So, in this video, I'm going to be walking through the installation, configuration, and backup of PVE using Proxmox Backup Server, and then give you my final thoughts. For those of you who are already seasoned PBS users, feel free to skip the installation and configuration section of this video, but for those of you coming from Veeam or have never used PBS before, stick around. Proxmox Backup Server is an open-source, enterprise-grade backup platform built for Proxmox VE and physical hosts. It's designed for efficient, incremental backups at the block level, with native support for deduplication, Z-standard compression, and client-side encryption. This helps reduce both network load and storage usage without sacrificing security. PBS is tightly integrated with Proxmox VE through built-in backup jobs and datastore management, but it also exposes a flexible API and supports backing up standalone systems. It features a modern web-based UI, CLI tools, and REST API access for automation and monitoring. Notice how I said backup and restore for both PVE and hosts. Yes, there is a PBS backup and restore client for Linux known as Proxmox Backup Client. It can be installed via app for Debian and Ubuntu, but only unofficial RPM builds are available for Red Hat-based distros. Outside of that, you'll need to download the source and compile it yourself. For anything else, Windows client versions are also not available from Proxmox Server Solutions, but there are people out there creating their own, and you can give them a try if you're brave enough. To put it simply, Proxmox Backup Server is primarily designed for backing up Proxmox Virtual Environment, with a minor exception for limited client support. All right, let's get started. First things first, let's talk about PBS's minimum requirements. Pulled right from the PBS docs on Proxmox's own site, the minimum requirements for PBS are as follows. For CPU, you'll need at least a 64-bit CPU with at least 2 cores. For memory, you'll need at least 2 GB of RAM. For storage, at least 8 GB of space. Note this doesn't include backup storage space. And of course, a network interface to connect PBS to your network. Obviously, you wouldn't run PBS in production with the minimum hardware requirements, and Proxmox Server Solutions does publish recommended hardware requirements as well, which bump up the CPU to at least 4 cores, and recommends you run at least 4 GB of RAM for PBS, plus 1 GB of RAM for each terabyte of storage in your system. For OS storage, they recommend 32 GB of redundant storage either via RAID controller or via ZFS. And for backup storage, they recommend basically as many random IOPS as you can give it, leaning on enterprise SSDs for the best results. They also note that if you're using mechanical drives, you would benefit from a ZFS metadata cache for better performance. And of course, redundant multi-gigabit network connections. Their recommended specs are legit for businesses, but for most HomeLabers running on budget gear, you will have to make some compromises which will affect the speed at which your backups complete. If slow backups aren't an issue for you, then you'll be fine. For my test environment, I'll be using my Dell R730XT host, which has dual E5 2680 V4 procs, 384 GB of RAM, roughly 84 TB of SAS SSDs, and 25 GB networking. I'm specifically using this host because I want to give PBS the best possible platform to run on before I make any judgment calls about performance. Alright, let's get PBS installed, configured, integrated with PVE, and run some backups. First thing you're going to need to do is head over to Proxmox.com and download the ISO for PBS. I'm not going to show you how to burn an ISO to a USB stick, you should know how to do that by now, but if you don't, go grab yourself a copy of Rufus or Balena Etcher and write that ISO to a USB stick. The installation of PBS will be done via the Dell iDRAC interface since that host is down in my rack and I'm sitting comfortably at my desk. I've already inserted the USB stick with the PBS ISO into the R730XT ahead of this. F11 is the hotkey for the boot manager on Dell servers, so we'll hit that and wait for the boot menu to come up. We'll head down to the one-shot UEFI boot menu option, and then arrow down to my USB stick labeled disk connected to front USB 2, and hit enter. This is the grub bootloader for PBS. Let's choose Install Proxmox Backup Server Graphical and kick this install off. After the initial boot process, our first stop is the EULA. What good application or software platform doesn't have a mile-long EULA? Read it if you want or not and click Agree. Next stop here is to select which disk will be our installation target for PBS. PBS, like Proxmox, will allow you to create a mirrored set for the OS installation, and that's what I want to do since my OS disks are cheaper consumer SSDs, so a mirror will help build some redundancy into my setup in case of failure. To do this, we'll start off by clicking the Options button, then we'll hit the down arrow on the File System field and choose ZFS RAID 1. Once selected, I now see the full list of disks in my host that I can select from my mirror. I have a ton of disks in this host, so instead of deselecting every disk manually like a scrub, I'll click Deselect All at the bottom. Now all I need to do is select the 2 SATA SSDs I want to have in my mirror in hard disk 0 and hard disk 1, and click OK. Easy peasy, all done here, I'll hit Next. Time zone and location is next. Choose the country, time zone, and keyboard layout that best suits you. Once that's all done, we'll click Next. Password time. Time to enter a password for the local root account on the host. Toss in something complex or not, that's up to you. After you're done with your super secure password, enter in an email address you want associated with the account. The email address will be used to send you alert notifications for the root user. Once done, smash that Next button. Now we need to configure the network interface for our new PBS host. My host effectively has 2 25 gigabit network interfaces, but PBS also sees my iDRAX IPMI interface as well. As you can see, one of my 25 gig connections is active, denoted by the green dot next to it. If we select that, we see the DHCP address the unit picked up when it booted. I want to have a different IP address on this host, so I'll change it to align with the address I'd like it to have. Your network configuration will be different, so select the NIC you want to use, change your IP address, gateway, and DNS to match your network as needed. Give your host a full host name, and click Next. Last page is just a summary of all the configurations we previously made. Everything looks good to me, so let's kick off this install. Now sit back, have a cup of coffee, a white Monster, or your favorite beverage of choice, and let the PBS install complete. My installation took roughly 2 minutes start to finish. Final step is to click Reboot and boot into our freshly installed Proxmox Backup Server for the first time. If all is well, post-boot, you should be greeted with the PBS console and the URL to get to the PBS GUI. In terms of installation processes, I will say the PBS is pretty painless. There were 4 or 5 steps, and the installation was off and running. Speaking of steps, it only takes 1 step, clicking the subscribe button. That helps me out and lets me know that you like content like this. Alright, let's pop over to the PBS GUI for the first time, get a look around, and start configuring it. Let's log in for the first time and do a quick tour of the UI before we configure storage. Users of Proxmox are going to feel right at home here in the GUI of PBS. We'll toss in the username of root and the password we set during the installation process, and click Login. The familiar no valid subscription message. Don't leave home without it. Users of free Proxmox should be equally familiar with the message. Welcome to the Proxmox Backup Server GUI. I have to admit it's cleaner than the Proxmox GUI and clearly informs what Proxmox Server Solutions is doing with Proxmox Data Center Manager in terms of design language. In the left pane, we find navigation, and in the right, our content pane. By default, we land on the dashboard section where we're given the familiar cards of data including system status, data store usage, longest tasks, running tasks, task summary, and subscription status. Much of the cards are empty here because this is a fresh install. Let's dig through the rest of the GUI. Next stop on the left is the Notes section, for adding notes to your system. Useful for sure. Moving on. The Configuration section is where you'd manage and configure the PBS system itself. In the main configuration section, you can edit and set your location and time zone in case you didn't do that during the install, edit your DNS settings, and manipulate the network interfaces on your system. Access control is where you can manage and configure the local users on the system, enable and configure 2FA, generate API tokens, add and configure permissions, and lastly, configure additional realms for authentication like an external LDAP server or ADS. Remotes is next. Remotes are essentially the connection between your Proxmox Backup Server and your Proxmox virtual hosts. Ours is empty right now, and we'll deal with that here in a bit. Certificates is where you can manage and manipulate your certificates on your PBS host. By default, we have a self-signed certificate on this host, but if we want to import an external cert, we do that here. PBS also supports Acme functionality for automatically pulling public certs from services like Let's Encrypt or other Acme-supported PKIs. Now on to notifications. In notifications, we can configure email notifications for PBS. By default, the mail to root notification is pre-configured. Keep in mind though, you'll not receive any notification emails from PBS until you configure an external SMTP server to send the messages to. And now, subscription. As you can infer, this is where you'd enter your subscription key if you purchased one from Proxmox Server Solutions. My status is not found because, I don't have a subscription for this host. Moving on. In administration, we get nice graphs of CPU usage, server load, memory and swap space usage, network traffic, root disk usage, transfer rates, IOPS, and I/O delay. And in the upper right corner, you can select the duration of the graphs so you can get heuristics for those metrics over time. Also at the top, you can view the services running on your host, check for and install updates on your host, configure update repositories for Debian and Proxmox itself, view your host syslog, and check on the status of tasks that may be running against your host. A shell provides you quick and easy access to the local shell of your PBS system. Nice to have, especially if you don't want to launch SSH on your own. Next up is storage disks. Here's where you can see all the physical disks in your system. You can see in my host here the 12 7.68 terabyte SSDs unused, followed by the 2 SATA SSDs in the ZFS mirror used for install and boot. I also have a little SATA DOM disk that I left in the system from a previous life that's unused. The disks section also allows you to manipulate your disks as well, including showing individual smart status, initializing, formatting, and wiping. Under the directory section, you can create additional directories for mount points, and in the ZFS section, you can manage any ZFS volumes you have on the system as well. Currently, I just have the mirrored pool called rpool and nothing else. Back to the left and tape backup. I gotta admit, I was kinda surprised to see that PBS supports tape drives and libraries. It's been a long time since I've had to deal with that, though the scars still remain. Anyway, if you happen to have a tape drive or library you want to use PBS with, here's where you configure it. God help you if you do though. And finally, data stores. Data stores are the storage volumes that will hold your backed up data. Again, I don't have anything here at the moment because this is a fresh install, and we'll get to that here shortly. Across the top, we also have prune and GC jobs, which is where you can run and create data pruning and garbage collection jobs to purge out old backup data. Sync jobs is where you can configure data replication tasks between PBS servers for disaster recovery. Verify jobs is where you can create data verification tasks. And of course, a permissions tab to manage access and permissions to APIs for the data stores on your host. I have no real complaints about the GUI since it's practically the same as PVE, and honestly, I think it looks better, more like the new Proxmox Data Center Manager, which is nice to see. Suffice to say that if you are familiar with the PVE GUI, you're going to be familiar with the PBS GUI. Alright, the next thing we need to do here is configure our data store to hold our backup data, add our PVE host as a remote, add PBS to my PVE server, create a backup job, and run it. Let's get to it. We'll create our data store first. The data store is where your backups will live on disk, and building it out is pretty painless. We'll swing over to Storage Disks on the left to get started. Now we'll swing up and click on ZFS, and then we'll click the Create ZFS button. Every good data store starts with a name, so I'll call mine backup_pool. Now we need to select the RAID level for this pool. ZFS offers a ton of options for data protection, and what you choose here will depend on your tolerance for risk. I'm going to select RAID Z1, which provides a single disk's worth of redundancy. Next up is to select the disks I want to include in the array. My plan is to create a single data store that includes all of my disks, and the easiest way to do that is to click Select All, and then remove the disk I don't want to be part of the array. Before we click Create and deploy our data store, make sure the checkbox for Add as Data Store is checked. That saves us the step of manually adding the new volume as a data store. Alright, let's click Create. Once the data store is created, we'll see it in the list of ZFS volumes on the host, and we can select it and view its details. We also see it listed on the left navigation pane under the data store section as well, and if we click on it, we get the familiar graphs of its utilization. Alright, done here, on to the next step. Volume out of the way, let's add our Proxmox host to PBS. To do this, we actually need to start on PVE first, so we'll get logged into my PVE server. We need to copy our certificate thumbprint, as that's how PBS will validate my PVE host. So we'll select my Proxinator host on the left, then navigate to Certificates. The certificate we're looking for here is the PVE-SS PEM certificate that's listed on the right. So we'll head up, select it, and click View Certificate above. We need the fingerprint here, so we'll select it, right-click, and copy it to my clipboard. Now, back over to my PBS server, we'll head over to Remotes on the left, and click the Add Booto at the top. First stop here is to give our remote a name, so in the Remote ID section, we'll type in Proxinator. Next step is the host field where we'll toss in the hostname of my PVE server. Auth ID is next. I'm logging into my PVE host as root using the local PAM service on the box, so my login syntax is root@pam, and then the password for the root account. Now we need to toss in the fingerprint we just copied a bit ago from the PVE host. Finally, if you'd like, you can put a comment in here for this remote. Now we'll click Add to complete this step. Alright, we're done, on to the next step. Alright, our next step here is to add PBS to our Proxmox server. Unlike other backup systems that I've used in the past, I think it's important to note that backups are set up, scheduled, and managed from PVE directly. Any of you who have watched the video on backing up Proxmox with Veeam, or have used any number of other backup systems know that this is an unusual approach to backup, as PVE is pushing the backups to PBS versus the backup system pulling the backups from PVE. Let's add PBS to PVE now. Before we leave PBS here to configure PBS on PvE, we need to grab the SSL thumbprint of our PBS server just like we did for PvE when we added the remote. So on your PBS server, head over to Certificates on the left, select the proxy.pem certificate in the list, and click View Certificate. Locate the thumbprint section at the top and copy it to your clipboard. Also, make note of the name of your provided data store. We'll also need that for the setup as well. Back on our PvE host GUI here, we'll head over to Storage in the middle navigation pane. To add our PBS server to Proxmox, we'll need to click Add at the top and Proxmox Backup Server at the bottom. First off is to provide an ID or name for this system. I'll use PBS since that's the host's name. Next, in the server field, I'll enter the FQDN of the server. In username, we'll be using the local root user on our PBS host, again using the same syntax we saw a bit ago for the remote for PvE. So we'll use root@pam followed by the password below for the root user. Now, down in the fingerprint field, we'll paste in our PBS certificate fingerprint we copied just a bit ago. One last step here, enter the name of your data store as written in PBS. Mine was called backup_pool, so that's what I'll enter here. Once done, we'll click Add Below. Now you can see the newest entry, PBS, at the bottom of my storage list. All's right in the world, let's move on. As you notice, there's a lot of back and forth between these two systems as we're setting them up, but thankfully after this point, everything is now ready for us to create our backup jobs and then run a full backup. Let's create our backup job for our VMs now. Backup configuration, job management, and so on are done in Proxmox itself. And now that we have our PBS storage added to Proxmox, we need to create a backup job. So we'll head over to Backup in Proxmox, and then click Add Above. Alright, the first stop here is to select our backup storage, and because we're using PBS, we're going to select PBS in the list. Next, we'll set a schedule for this backup. I'm going to be straight with you here. The way they manage scheduling is dumb, and it took me a while to really grasp what's going on. I want to run this job nightly, so I'll choose the example schedule of every day 2100. And when I do that, it just drops 2100 into the schedule, which I'll change to midnight because 9 p.m. is too early. I get it, they like to use fuzzy logic for scheduling, but I'd like a much cleaner approach to choosing the date, time, and frequency of my backups. Next task is to choose the virtual workloads I want to back up. For the sake of simplicity here, I'm just going to select all and let it run. I'm doing this as an example here, but you might want to schedule out separate backup jobs to run based on what your workloads are. Maybe you have SQL jobs that need more frequent backups, or maybe you have systems that don't change all that often and can be backed up weekly. That's all up to you. I'll finish the selection off with a job comment just for funsies. All done from a job creation standpoint, let's click Create. Now let's go ahead and kick off the backup and see how it goes. To do this, we'll select the job we just created and head up to Run Now at the top to kick it off. This is a full backup, so it's going to take a while to run. While it's going on, we can pop back over to PBS and have a look at the graphs as the data is coming in. Also, if we swing over to the data store in PBS and head over to the Content tab, we can see the VMs and LXC containers that have been backed up already. This will take a while to complete. What video about PBS wouldn't be complete without a walkthrough of restoring a VM or accessing backed up individual files? Just like backups are done in PvE, so are restores, however, in a different location. If you want to restore a VM, you do it via the VM's entry in PvE itself. Let's walk through that now. We'll grab a VM here that we'd like to restore, say my Teapot VM on the left. Once selected, we'll then head over to the backup section in the middle navigation pane. You'll notice that everything is blank here because the wrong backup storage location is selected. Over in the top right corner, we'll click the down arrow and select the PBS backup storage where my backups are held. There we go. We see all of the daily backups I have for this VM. Restoring the VM is as easy as selecting the backup you wish to restore and clicking Restore at the top. From this point, clicking Restore will restore the system over the top of the current VM. But let's say you wanted to restore a file or download a file from a backup. Well, you can do that too. To access files within a specific VM's backup, you'll need to be in the same location in PvE. Then select the backup from which you want to restore from, and up at the top click File Restore. In the File Restore window, you can see all the physical disks that are backed up for the VM, and you can easily navigate through them to find the file you want to restore. Once you find the file that you want, you select it, and click the Download button. That's it. Alright, you got this far, let's talk about my final thoughts on PBS. I always like to start with the good. If you are a home lab or a small shop that just has PvE, you can't go wrong with using PBS to back up your system. Without sounding like a shill for Proxmox Server Solutions, it really is a bespoke, simple, tightly integrated, unified backup and restore system for Proxmox Virtual Environment. And it is completely free, which you can't beat that price. Users of PvE and PBS love this combination, and I know that even in our community, they sing the praises of PBS all the time. So what could I possibly have negative to say about PBS? Where do I start? First things first, the setup for PBS is strange when you compare it to the other standard backup systems in the world. Outside of configuring the remote connection in PBS for PvE, PBS really only lives as a glorified repository for your backups. All backup functionality occurs on your PvE host itself. You manage backup jobs and restores from PvE, which is unusual, but not really that big of a deal. I also think that PBS is too limited. It only really backs up PvE, which it does well, but to be a competitor for backup, I want it to back up every system that it can. Yes, I know there's a backup client that has functionality that would allow you to back up non-PvE systems, but guys, it's trash. It only works in Debian-based Linux, there are no other native Linux distributions, and you'd have to either compile or convert it to get them working on something else. And if you do end up attempting to use the client, it's entirely command line driven and laborious to use. There's no client GUI for configuration, backup, or restore. Also, I can hear the chuckles from the audience as I'm about to say this, there's no Windows version of the backup either. For businesses who might be looking to save some money and move to PBS, I'd caution that PBS lacks the real protection that even the most modest enterprise backup software has in terms of ransomware, immutability, and so on. Those might not be important to you, but they're important for businesses that have requirements for disaster recovery and business continuity. There's also no application awareness functionality that I can see in PBS. Application awareness is a key feature of enterprise backup where the backup system is aware of the types of applications you're running in your workloads and can trigger functions before the backup occurs. An example of this is SQL Server transaction log truncation and flushing before backups happen. If you're running applications in your VMs that require you to take extra steps before backup happens, like SQL does, PBS can't do that as far as I can see. All of this being said, if your requirements are straight backup and restore, or you're just home labbing and want a solid, free solution, PBS works great. You can't get more bespoke, small batch, artisanal backup solution for Proxmox VE than PBS. And that, friends, will do it for this video. If you liked it, throw us a sub and a like, and if you have a beef with anything I've said here, let me know in the comments below. Special thank you to YouTube members. You guys help keep the lights on, and we thank you for it. If you'd like to help support the channel, consider becoming a member or buy some of our swag. It all helps us keep making these videos. And now that you finished watching this video, how about checking out this playlist over here of other great self-hosting and HomeLab videos we've done in the past. If you're looking for your next great HomeLab idea, we can help.